Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're going to pick up where we left off. Tom Petty, 1980s, here with Sam St. John. Just a recap of the decade. He was a busy man in the 1980s. Not only the MTV videos, which were new at the time, he was right in on that, won some awards, in fact. Live Aid was a big event. Tom Petty, a prominent member of the Philadelphia show here in the United States. Fantastic performance. That's in 1985, midway through the decade. He also puts out a live album, Pack Up the Plantation, which Sam will hold up there. Yep. Fantastic. A lot of brass in it, different sounding than maybe the 70s and early 80s. He did a tour with Bob Dylan as well. For what, a year and a half, Sam? What do you think?
It was 87 to 88, something like that.
Yeah. And of course, the Traveling Wilburys. We don't want to leave them out, where George Harrison, Jeff Lynne, Roy Orbison, Dylan, and Petty formed a super group, put out that wonderful album, the first album in 1988?
88. Yep.
88. And in addition to all those things we just outlaid, 5 studio albums, 4 with the Heartbreakers, 1 solo album, various appearances on television for some of the late shows like Letterman and I guess Conan, and I think he even played Saturday Night Live 1 or 2 times as well, if I'm not mistaken. So he was all over. He was prolific, as to put it mildly. Also, he contributed to Stevie Nicks' album, wrote that classic duet, Stop Dragging My Heart Around, on her, 1981 album, I believe 81. It was.
Belladonna.
Yeah. Belladonna. Fantastic. So that's just some of the extraneous stuff that Mr. Petty was doing. Not to mention, the heart of our show here is the studio albums. We're going to take them on one at a time. Like I said, there's 5 of them. So we're going to go through it. Sam will outline some of the highlights of each album. Then we'll do our 3 favorite songs from each. And just a reminder, at the end of the series, we're going to rank all of the albums, along with the Mudcrutch albums, the Heartbreakers, and the solo albums. That'll be a big wind-up episode. So, Sam, first project here, 1981, Hard Promises.
Hard Promises.
Right here, baby.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah. This is one of those albums that when I was starting to get into the deeper cuts of Petty, going beyond the greatest hits, this was one of the ones that I really delved into, especially in college. This is when I got into this. Again, 1981. A lot of history behind this album. This is an album where it was one of the first instances where Petty was showing that he was, kind of rebellious against the record company. There was a big to-do with MCA Records where the price of a record went up $1. It was called superstar pricing. I think they did it with Steely Dan. They did it with the ELO Xanadu album with Olivia Newton-John. They bumped the price to $9.98, which is crazy to think of a vinyl record for $10. Whereas the standard price was $8.98. And that was a big deal. Petty was refusing to nudge on the price. I know that what's cool about this album, you can't see it on the screen, but there's a box here with the pricing of the $8.98 records. So that was Petty kind of showing his rebellious side, standing in a record store for the cover. But as a record itself, it's got fantastic tunes. One of the best openers ever with The Waiting. And then goes right into A Woman in Love, But It's Not Me, which both are really iconic music videos in their own right, with the black and white versus The Waiting, where they're like in the TV studio with, the paint, sprayed across the wall and that kind of stuff. Yep. Just playing the music. There's no story or anything behind them. Just cool looking dudes. You had the Stevie Nicks collaboration on Insider. You have her doing background vocals for the last song, You Can Still Change Your Mind. So obviously, he wrote the Stop Dragging My Heart Around during these sessions, and then, gave the song to Stevie and her guys, but they still contributed the backing vocals and band to that tune. But I just think it's a fantastic song. It's a fantastic record. Again, I got sucked into the deep cuts. It's produced by Jimmy Iovine again, who had produced the previous record and the Torpedoes, and would work with Petty on a couple more records here in the 80s. But another little fun thing that I always forget about until I look it back up is this was the album that came out after John Lennon passed away. And so on those early presses, you look at the dead wax and they put a tribute to John Lennon that said, "We love you, JL." So that's kind of cool because he was supposed to be in the same studio where they were recording. And obviously that never happened. They were hoping to meet him. Obviously never came to fruition, but fantastic record. It's a great rock and roll record, I think. It's just fast paced. And it's the last record to fully have Ron Blair, original Heartbreaker, on bass, though we'll mention him a couple other times. But it's the last traditional Heartbreakers lineup before, his departure, and Howie Epstein would join on the next album. But those are some basic thoughts and little nuggets about this record.
Great. Yeah, I have all those written down too. I like the Lennon tribute too in the Dead Wax. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Obviously, they started recording this in late 80 because Lennon was killed in the end of 1980, I guess. And
in December. Yep.
December rolled over into 81 when it was released. As far as our three favorite cuts, what do you have for us? And then we'll hit a deep cut or two on the way out.
Number 3 for me is going to be the duet with Stevie Nicks, Insider. I think it's a beautiful track. It's got that great line, I have to live with some hard promises. I've crawled through the briars. I'm an insider, which is the title of the album. Hard Promises comes from that song. Number 2, I'm going to go with the mega hit off of the record, which is The Waiting. I think it's just a perfect tune. Again, that jangly, birdsy kind of song. He's done it a million different ways live. He's done like some acoustic versions of it, which are great. But at its core, it's just a great song. And then for number 1, I've got the deep cut, which I just fell in love with listening to this album, which was A Thing About You, which I just think is a great tune. It's got a great drum roll on it. It's got that kind of Petty snarl on it. And I just think it's a fantastic rock and roll tune. Honey, let me tell you, I got a thing about you, which is just, it's a simple song. It's a simple rock and roll, 3-minute tune, but I think it's fantastic. It always makes me happy when I'm listening to it.
Great. Insider would be my number 3 as well. I just want to, it's one of these deep songs here. I'm the one who ought to know. I'm the one you couldn't trust. Yeah, I'm the lonely, silent one. I'm the one left in the dust. I just like those images of wordplay. So that's my number 3 with Stevie. My number 2 is A Woman in Love. It's Not Me. Just a hard rocking classic. And you mentioned The Waiting. Has to be the number 1 song on there with that jangly guitar in the opening track. The deep cuts, I have 2 actually 3 that I want to single out. And they're all in a row. I like King's Road, Letting You Go, and A Thing About You. All 3 of them work for me as Tom Petty and the Heartbreaker songs. They all have that vibe. They all have that feel. They're awesome. So
I'll single out. I love King's Road as well, but I'm going to single out Night Watchman. It's got that great kind of funky kind of sound to it. Great version on the live anthology album as well. So Night Watchman, I just think, is a very cool track. It's kind of different from other Petty tunes. So
definitely
that'll be
different.
pick.
Yep. All right. So then we go to the next year, 1982, and they crank out the next album, Long After Dark. This is where Howie Epstein takes over for the most part from Ron Blair as the bassist. What kind of background you have on this one?
It sounded like it was a prolific time for Petty in terms of writing, because there were 2 songs that didn't make the cut, which ended up on the American Treasure box set that came out a few years ago, and then also the playback set that came out in the early 2000s, which are the songs Keep a Little Soul and Keeping Me Alive, which are both just really, really fun, cool tracks that you're thinking, tracks this good were left off. I mean, that just shows Petty was almost at his peak songwriting, I think, in the 80s. I mean, he was just in terms of just hits and hooks and all that stuff. He just knew what he was doing. There was a song that, so the big single on here was, well, there were two big singles. One of them was Change of Heart. And that was apparently inspired by Do Ya by The Move, Jeff Lynne's band before ELO, which you can hear if you listen to those chords that start Do Ya, and then also the kind of power poppy kind of chords that he uses on Change of Heart. But what I found interesting re-listening to this, last week, was I just always forget how many of these songs I really like, because they're obviously not on the radio unless you're listening to Tom Petty radio on Sirius XM. Just so many of these cuts are just so great. And yeah, I mean, like you said, Ron Blair, he's on one track. I think it was an amicable split. I think he was doing something like more career based when he left. I just didn't want to be in the touring life anymore. So they gave him a lot of love when he left. But Howie Epstein, who kind of became their go-to man up until his passing in the early 2000s, provided all those background vocals, so many background vocals, and really became kind of a centerpiece of the band's sound in the 80s and 90s. So those are the big things. But yeah, so the first album for, again, another kind of classic era of the Heartbreakers, and Howie would be inducted with them when they were inducted in the Hall of Fame in the 2000s. So he was that crucial to their hits. So there's a couple little things from this record.
Very good. Yeah, as far as top three, I'll go first this time. I've got Straight Into Darkness at number 3, sort of leaving a relationship, starting over with a new one. And then Change of Heart. I like the power pop sound, very underrated, even in his hits catalog. It always stands out for me when I hear it. And number 1 is You Got Lucky. Although it's heavy on the synth, still it works as a song. And the great vocal by Petty. I like the way he inflects certain words in his voice. He's not the traditional, smooth sailing kind of singer, but when he wants to make a point with his voice, he does it. And that's the case all throughout this album. But in particular, that song, You Got Lucky When I Found You, just a great song. And
one that you always associate with the video, kind of like that Mad Max looking video where they're like in the arcade, and like they have the cool hats and the spaceships and all that. My number 3 and my number 2 match yours. I've got Straight Into Darkness at number 3. Just underrated Petty ballad. Well, more like mid-tempo, but I think it's just a great tune. Change of Heart. Again, he had that live video with that song where he's got like the bandana around his head. Just a killer track. Again, there's crunchy chords at the beginning that I love so much. My number 1 is also going to be, well, it won't. I'll focus on another deep cut, I guess. But the song "Finding Out" is my number 1. I just absolutely love the background vocals. I think it's Howie on that, where Petty's that I'm finding out, and then like that huge note, I'm finding out. It just kind of holds itself. I just think it's, again, another fast-paced rock and roll tune, completely underrated. Could have been a hit if Petty didn't write so many hits. I think this one could have made its way up the charts a little bit. I just thought the first time I heard that, I thought, good grief, those are some killer background vocals. So Finding Out is my number 1. I guess that's one.
I'm sorry, that's one of my deep cuts. Finding Out and Deliver Me, those two in particular.
I was going to mention Deliver Me again, just a fantastic tune. And then I even like A Wasted Life at the end, kind of like that little kind of slow fade out, but he's kind of playfully, with that little ow, ow, ow kind of lyric. It's kind of got some percussion like bongo playing, I guess, by Stan Lynch or maybe Phil Jones. I don't remember who's playing percussion on that, but so Deliver Me is, again, a killer track.
It's got those hooks, and you mentioned Keeping Me Alive. That should have been on this album, man. That would have put it over the edge. It would have upped it in the rankings for me. That's one of his best lost songs,
it's kind of Everly Brothers sounding almost.
That's a great song. I don't know why they decided to leave it off, but I think it's a great song.
It's so good. Yeah.
All right. So now we skip a couple years here. We're going to 1985 for, I know, one of your favorites, Southern Accents. Great cover, fantastic album. And this is, again, maybe a little uneven. That some of the songs are really highlight all-time Tom Petty material, and then I have a few on here that are not necessarily classics, but
Yeah.
overall solid as hell.
Yeah.
I think there's too many cooks in the kitchen. There's like 4 producers on this album, you know?
Something like that. Yeah. If you count Petty and Campbell, and you had Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics is all over this album. Jimmy Iovine again on a couple of songs.
Isn't Robbie Robertson involved a little bit too? I mean, you got.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's a lot, and there was kind of a hint of it with "You Got Lucky," like obviously where the '80s were heading. That was kind of Petty's first real '80s sounding song, was "You Got Lucky," and then again, you jump right into the center of the decade. You've got to match what's being put out there on the radio. You've got to match, the right. Robert Palmer's and the Eurythmics, and
right.
Hall & Oates, like all those groups that were killing it in the '80s. Madonna was starting to come around. Like you had to really match that. And I think that's where they pulled in Dave Stewart, because the Eurythmics were hit makers and he was all about that 80s slick production.
Yep.
Obviously the album was supposed to be a concept album about Petty growing up in Florida and just Southern living. But again, you've got songs that just don't match. You had songs that were left off. This is actually when he wrote the Apartment song, which would end up on Full Moon Fever. Right. There were a couple of other tracks that didn't make it. One of them was the song Trailer, which they actually released, I think, as a B-side, which is a really good song. They would end up re-recording it as Mudcrutch for the second Mudcrutch album. But that would have been perfect for this album. Again, just about 2 lower income people. They're in love and they don't care that they're living in a trailer. They're together. It all works. The songs that match the concept are my favorites on the album, which I'll get into in a second. But like you said, too many cooks in the kitchen. It's too much of like a patchwork quilt that doesn't quite go together. Yeah,
but it does have some, highlights.
Peak songwriting. Sure. Yeah.
What do you got for your top 3?
Number 3, I have The Best of Everything, which is the final track. Which again, if there weren't a couple of the other tracks on there, it would easily be number 1. This came out years after the band had by the band, I mean the band, Robbie Robertson and the guys had disbanded with The Last Waltz, but you still have Richard Manuel and Robbie who's producing, and you hear it, you're like, oh, of course that could be a band song. It's got the horns on the back in the background, which sound very band-like, and I know he pulled out a big band on this tour. The Pack Up the Plantation album came out this same year, but just a fantastic. Wherever you are tonight, I wish you the best of everything. It's just beautiful. Just a gorgeous song. Number 2 is going to be the song Rebels. This holds the infamous, story of Petty got angry during production, punched a wall, tore up his hand, had pins and needles all over it. And they told him he'd probably never play guitar again. And he kind of gave him the middle finger, and he ended up playing guitar until his passing. But that was like a bit like a stress level peak for him. Again, fantastic song. And then number 1 for me, which I'll go ahead and give away, is my absolute favorite Tom Petty song of all time, Southern Accents. I can relate so much to that song, being from Virginia. Just so many great lyrics. I mean, I'm sure you have a couple lyrics you can single out. I know it's a favorite of yours. There's a great version from 1996 that Johnny Cash did on his Unchained album, which has Petty on the background and some of the Heartbreakers. But Southern Accents by a long shot is my number 1. It's number 1 in his whole catalog.
Yep. I knew that was your number 1 because we've done other Petty stuff and that always comes up. So that's cool. That's my number 3, Southern Accents. Number 2 is The Best of Everything, which is an excellent closer. I just love that song. And I played it again earlier this week, and it just it sticks with me. Right now it's in my head. So The Best of Everything. I love it. And number 1's Rebels. It's in my top 5 Tom Petty songs of all time. Down in Dixie, 1 foot in the grave, 1 foot on the pedal. I was born a rebel. I mean, I just love those lyrics, and again that snarl that he comes up with something at the end of maybe a verse, and then the band jumps in. I don't want to overlook "Don't Come Around Here No More," which is the one I believe MTV Award videos with the Alice in Wonderland theme and all that stuff. Fantastic song. There's another song in here that's funky with a lot of horns. Make It Better, Forget About Me. That's got that Dave Stewart vibe going on.
Yeah.
It Ain't Nothing to Me, sort of a social commentary on what's going on in the world. It ain't nothing to me. He's naming
also
names.
Dave Stewart. Yeah.
Yeah. So solid album. There's a couple on here which I'm not going to single out because I don't want to get negative, but they're just a little bit off the beaten path, so to speak. But overall, fantastic album. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. I mean, the song I want to single out is the song Spike. I absolutely think that's a hilarious song. Again, kind of fits with the theme because it's about a biker that him and Mike Campbell saw at a bar in Florida. About he wears a dog collar. I just think it's got the petty humor. I love the track. Hey, Spike, you scared my wife. It's really good. And then I love the song "Dogs on the Run." Just fantastic. Those horns that just kick in, and Mike Campbell's guitar just soars on it. So those are the two that I pick out for the deeper cuts.
Cool. And like we said, that's I think April of 1985 that record was released. The same year he puts out Pack Up the Plantation, the live album. And again, the horns are prominent on this. Real raucous kind of performances, I think. Excellent. Yeah. And we're not going to break down the album, but I just wanted to say how busy he was. And Live Aid, of course, is right in the middle of that as well in the summer of 85. Then a couple years later, we have this album here, Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, 1987. Just produced by Mike Campbell and Tom Petty. All the other guys are sort of left off of this. And this is, I don't know, I was telling Sam off camera that this is probably one of my least favorite Heartbreakers albums for sure. It just doesn't have enough oomph, enough good songs. It looks like you talk about patchwork. There's a lot of leftover stuff that's sort of thrown together or maybe ad-libbed. It doesn't have the structure I like in the song. So I'm curious to see what you think about it because you're more forgiving than I am. You like pretty much a lot of this material. So
yeah, I mean, like I said on the last week's episode, I don't find a lot of fault with Tom Petty. Now, obviously, this out of all of his albums, this is definitely his most produced. This is his most 80s record for sure, because even Southern Accents kind of toes the line between those, heartland kind of songs with the Dave Stewart. This one's essentially, for all intents and purposes, completely 80s. This is everybody that was around this time had an album like this. All the classic guys, McCartney, Dylan, Springsteen, they all had albums like this. It did. Obviously, Petty songwriting shines through, and even if they would have stripped back some of the production, this probably would have rose in both of our ranks. But like you said, produced by Tom and Mike, which is great for them to kind of go back to their roots for just the two of them. You don't have Jimmy, you don't have Dave Stewart. You still have the same lineup, the original four guys plus Howie. So they're really locking in on that lineup. This is album number 3, and the first album to not have Ron Blair at all on it. He played bass on Southern Accents too on one track, but so Ron Blair is completely out of the picture now. So just again, lots of 80s production. I don't have a lot more to say about it. It's one that I go to fairly infrequently. So
yeah, I'm interested to see if your 3 favorites here and what order they're in.
Yeah, number 3 for me. This one I had to kind of juggle around. I even had to listen to it. I had listened to a couple of tracks after listening to the album to just verify. But I'm going to go with How Many More Days for number 3, which again kind of keeps some of that Petty sound. With Ben Mott's piano is very prevalent in it. It's not synth. Yeah. Again, it's one of those songs that doesn't have as much of that production on it, and I just think it's a really good kind of middle of the road Petty song. Number 2 has always been kind of an up and down song for me, but right now it's my number 2. I'm going to go with It'll All Work Out, which kind of has this almost like this, like I think he was inspired by listening to some like Chinese folk music or something. It has like that kind of Asian sound. Campbell's on the mandolin, which he's a great mandolin player. A great ballad, you know. I just think it's just a great kind of lullaby, almost kind of song. And then number one is the big hit, "Jammin' Me," which is just like a commentary on, again, information being thrown at everybody in the 80s. You know, cable TV was really picking up. He was touring, and you know, MTV was huge. This was co-written with Bob Dylan. He name drops, you know, Joe Piscopo, Eddie Murphy, Vanessa Redgrave, which that's all Dylan. That whole part is Bob Dylan. But yeah, "Jammin' Me," and the great video. And I'm gonna say, well, I'll save it for a deep cut. But those are my three.
Yeah, mine a little bit different. My number 3, I've got "Think About Me." It's got that cool rock and roll rootsy guitar riff in it. I like the song. 2 is "Jammin' Me." You mentioned getting slammed by all the media that was taking off in the 80s, cable TV, and just all the entertainment news on all channels all the time. Celebrity, the popularity of celebrity and the emphasis on it. And number 1, I like "It'll All Work Out." That's my little gem on the album. I do like that Asian sound. I like everything about it. I know it's kind of low key, but it's a beautiful song for me. Number 1.
Yeah, good number 1. Yeah, I'd say for a deep cut to pull from this album, I'm gonna go, and I'll do this in honor of my dad, who I think this is probably his favorite song on the album. To me, it's a little bit too 80s, but it's the song "Runaway Trains," which is, again, great lyrics, some great kind of ringing guitar. You know, I guess it's one of those things you can never explain, like when an angel cries, like "Runaway Trains." Just really, really neat tune that didn't really get a whole lot of airplay. At least it doesn't anymore. But "Runaway Trains" will be the one I'll single out.
Yeah, I have the same one. "Runaway Trains" is my next in line. Yeah, I don't love it, but it's the next best song on the album outside of the top 3. I really have problems with the back half of the album. I seriously do.
Yeah.
But everybody's allowed a clunker once in a while, and that's just how I feel about that. And next, we're going to go to 1989, Petty solo.
Close it out.
Solo album. This is it. Full Moon Fever. And here's Jeff Lynne influence all over this baby here. Mike Campbell and Tom Petty hook up with Jeff Lynne. Cool cover, cool back. And this is just chock full of hits. This is, you know, virtually a greatest hits for 5 or 6 of these songs. They're all going to appear on his greatest hits when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
But I don't know what to say. It's just he's hanging out with Harrison. He's hanging out with Lynn, and the Wilburys are already they put out an album the year before this, and this is just fantastic all the way through. I mean, I think it's front loaded. The first half is better than the second half for me, but there's some deep cuts on side 2 that work very well as well. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously, he was full into the Wilbury world. He had toured with Bob the year before the first Wilburys album, and on this album you have, you know, in various levels of, you know, collaboration. Obviously, Jeff Lynne is the number 1 guy on this album, but George Harrison's playing on "I Won't Back Down." Roy Orbison provides a little bit. He's also got Del Shannon shows up just to kind of hang out in the studio. He mentions Del and "Running Down a Dream." Again, what was interesting and one of the funny things is that with the MCA president, who was Irving Azoff, you know, he was in charge of a ton of people. He almost didn't want to put this thing out because he said there were no hits on it.
I don't understand that, because he usually has a good ear. I mean, he worked with the Eagles forever. He knew a hit when he heard it, but he must have been on drugs not to hear the hits.
He must have been doing something. I think it was also a weird time for Petty because I think his house had burned down in California, so he lost a lot of his stuff. I think his famous top hat was one of the casualties of the house fire. He, I think, was struggling. I think he was going through divorce at this time as well.
Yeah.
And so they recorded a lot of it, I think, in Mike Campbell's garage. And so, like, mainly the main three musicians are Mike Campbell, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. And then you have various Heartbreakers jumping in. And this was kind of the beginning of the end for drummer Stan Lynch, who,
Yeah.
again, original drummer. He never liked playing these songs live because he's nowhere on this album. He felt like he was in a cover band playing Free Fallin' and I Won't Back Down live. Ben Mott's only like on one track. Howie's on one or two. But yeah, so no, everybody was on there except for him. Getting studio guys to play, and Jeff Lynne, Mike, and Tom also playing drums at various times. But that was the big thing, was that there were no hits on it according to MCA Records. But yeah, I mean, I won't give a lot away about this. This was the first album that I listened to all the way through that was Tom Petty related, other than his greatest hits. So this was the first album that I really, really fell in love with when I was in early high school. So yeah, holds a lot of meaning to me, as it does for a lot of people. This is usually people's, especially my generation's, starter because of Free Fallin' and all that stuff that you hear still on the radio.
Yeah. I just want to mention that they do a great cover here of the Byrds, Feel a Whole Lot Better, written by Gene Clark. It's a standout track on this album.
Yeah.
And let's hear your top three and some deep cuts.
Top three, again, like you said, there are so many hits, on the first half. There's a reason it sold so well. But number three for me is going to be I Won't Back Down. I know that's a lot of people's favorites. It became an anthem. It's still an anthem down in Florida for the Florida Gators football team, because Petty was from down there. He was a Florida Gators fan. And it just became this like symbol of resilience. Just played at a lot of different functions. It's been covered a million times. It's a Petty classic. It's like standard catalog. Number two, I'm going to go with the Apartment song, which is again, it dates back to Southern Accents 4 years before. There's an early version that he does with Stevie Nicks that's really good, almost better than the original because she's got the high harmonies on it. Just again, kind of like that, doom 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 kind of 1950s sounding melody to it, a little bit more acoustic, but it's a really fun song. And number one, I'm gonna go, believe it or not, with Feel a Whole Lot Better, the Byrds cover.
Nice.
The first time I heard it, I'd never heard the Byrds cover, so I'm thinking like, oh, it just sounds like a Tom Petty song that sounds like an earlier Tom Petty song. But obviously, not knowing much about Tom Petty at that time, figuring out, oh, well, the Byrds were a big influence. The Byrds, it fits right into Petty's catalog. So I absolutely love his version of it. Maybe a little bit better than the Byrds. Maybe.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention too, they did another Byrd song on that live album, Say You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, on the Pack Up the Plantation.
Yeah.
So
it was a big opener for him.
Big opener. This is tough to rank. I'm going to just go off the top of my head here. Number three, I'm going to do one that you do in your set once in a while, and that's You're So Bad. I always like that song.
Great.
I like the Sam St. John version as well. Number two is Running Down a Dream. It would be hard for me to leave that out. It's just that beginning, and they even named their documentary after, wasn't it? Running Down a Dream. I mean,
yeah, fantastic.
So, it's got a lot of influence there. Number one for me, you mentioned it, the anthemic quality of it, and that is I Won't Back Down, fist in the air, kind of, I'm not going to take it anymore. Kind of, it's an attitude song. It can be, and it's great. When I saw Petty in concert, always a highlight. The whole crowd getting, I Won't Back Down. There Ain't No Easy Way Out. All that stuff. So, interesting that we both left Free Fallin' off our list, because it's just one that gets hammered over the head too much. But what are some of your deep cuts? Because this is loaded with deep cuts as well.
I mean, I even like the goofy Closure Zombie Zoo. It's goofy. Just Petty's take on, like the San Francisco scene. But my deep cut number one that I'd probably pick is All Right for Now. Again, kind of matches the previous albums. It'll All Work Out. It's like this album's version of that. Just, again, a beautiful, soft song. Yeah. I absolutely love it. Yeah, and then You're So Bad. I mean, I'll mention that one too. That one even had a video, a kind of a goofy video that went along with it. But yeah, I play it live. When I play one of the couple of Petty songs that I do. So Yeah, I'll go with those two. But I will mention that the song "Running Down a Dream," that solo was completely improvised. They just said, "Mike, we need a solo, go," and he just ripped it. And apparently they had to fade it out because he kept going.
Yeah.
So if you think about that next time you listen to it, it might raise the bar on it just a little bit more for you.
Yeah, it's fantastic. My two sort of under the radar songs are "Love Is a Long Road." It's a long. I like the nasally tone when.
Yeah, yeah,
And "A Face in the Crowd." I like "The Face in the Crowd." You can see him actually making contact with the audience on that. You were just a face in the crowd.
yeah,
Poignant kind of tune for a
yeah.
rock star.
Also had a
So
video with it.
yeah, but the whole album's great. The ones you mentioned are excellent. I like Zombie Zoo. There's something catchy about that too. I mean, as silly as it is,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So that'll wrap up our 1980s all time.
yeah.
Anyway, go over and sub up Sam St. John. Please leave some comments. We appreciate everybody watching and the response we've gotten so far. We're hoping it picks up a little steam as we go ahead. We love Tom Petty, if you can't tell. And we hope you're in for a good time watching these individual episodes. So,
Yeah.
thumbs up. Like the episode if you like this kind of content. Please leave some comments, like we said. We appreciate everybody out there that's watching this. Sam, thanks again. We'll see you next time for the 90s. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you next.